working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The Puerto Princesa, Palawan-based Western Commander Westcom announced that there are no reported intrusions or security threats around the Malampaya natural gas to power project platform. After a long heated campaign, polls have opened and Americans are now bracing for a tense night of election results and legal challenges ahead. The results of the midterm elections 2022 could have significant implications for the Asia-Pacific region.
Unfortunately,
small island nations led calls to the UN Climate Summit to tax oil companies' windfall profits to pay for damages caused by natural disasters and enact a non-proliferation treaty to halt fossil fuel production. The U.S.-China rivalry and growing fears of a new North Korean nuclear test will loom over a meeting this week of Southeast Asian leaders attended by U.S. President Joe Biden. First in our news, the Puerto Princesa, Palawan-based Western Command, or Westcom, announced that there are no reported intrusions or security threats around the Malampaya natural gas power project platform. This came after the BRP Artemio Ricarte, or PS-37, one of the three Jacinto-class patrol vessels in service, completed its three-day maritime patrol mission off the platform and its more than 500-kilometer-long pipelines on Tuesday. We're happy to note that PS-37 reported zero intrusion into the MNGPP exclusion and safety zones, according to Westcom Joint Task Force Malampaya Deputy Commander Navy Captain Arnel Teodoro in a Facebook post late Tuesday. It was the BRP Artemio Ricarte's first mission to the area since 2013. Malampaya is a deepwater offshore, ultra-deepwater pipeline project, and it uses state-of-the-art technology to extract natural gas and condensate from the depths of the Palawan Basin, and then processes the gas in a nearby shallow water production platform. It then transports it to three provinces through an underwater pipeline. South Korea's military said it had retrieved and analyzed debris from a missile the North fired across the two countries' de facto maritime border during a recent blitz of launches. The Defense Ministry said in a statement that it had successfully retrieved a 3-meter-long, 2-meter-wide piece of debris, which it identified as a North Korean SA-5 missile. The SA-5 is a missile that can also be used as a ground-to-ground missile, it said. It also said Russia recently used a similar ground-to-air missile as a ground-to-ground missile in the Ukraine war. North Korea fired more than 20 missiles on November 2, including one short-range ballistic missile that crossed the northern limit line. It prompted a rare warning for residents of South Korea's Olengdo Island to seek shelter in bunkers. Seoul's military said at the time it was the first time since the peninsula was divided at the 1953 end of Korean War hostilities that a North Korean missile had landed so near the South's territorial waters. The U.S.-China rivalry and growing fears of a new North Korean nuclear test will loom over a meeting this week of Southeast Asian leaders attended by U.S. President Joe Biden. China will seek to consolidate her relationships with Southeast Asian countries in order to either shore up regional support for Beijing or make sure that they do not end up being on the U.S. side against China, according to analyst Yong Wook Ryu of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Making his second trip to Asia this year off the back of bruising midterm elections at home, President Biden faces another tough battle to woo ASEAN leaders, many of whom are wary of overtly taking sides against a giant neighbor and key trading partner. At a summit with ASEAN leaders in Washington in May, President Biden pledged $150 million in support for Southeast Asian nations, dwarfed by the $1.5 billion that China promised to the region last year in just COVID aid. The U.S.-China relationship is also deteriorating over issues including Taiwan and alleged rights abuses in Xinjiang, and other Western governments have complained about Chinese activities on their soil, including harassment of dissidents. The war in Ukraine is also likely to weigh in on leaders' minds at ASEAN. Kyiv will sign a treaty of amity and cooperation with ASEAN on Thursday. This is a first step towards establishing formal relations with the bloc. And Cambodia has said it's considering a request by President Volodymyr Zelensky to address the meeting by video link. Russia has been invited to the ASEAN summit, but it is not clear who will represent it. Leaders are also expected to discuss the growing crisis on the Korean Peninsula, where Pyongyang carried out a spate of weapons tests last week, including an intercontinental ballistic missile. The North, whose closest ally is China, says its tests were in response to the largest ever military drills between the U.S. and South Korea, which ended at the weekend. Coordinating Minister for Political, Legal and Security Affairs, Mahfoud MD, said cooperation in the field of democracy and human rights will be discussed during the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, which will be held on November 9 to the 12th this year. A number of strategic topics will be discussed at the forum, including cooperation in the field of democracy, human rights, intelligence, and common security, he informed in a statement streamed on the YouTube channel of the ministry on Monday. According to Antara News, Mahfoud will accompany President Joko Widodo, who will officially take over the ASEAN chair from Cambodia to the summit. He also said other strategic issues that will be discussed at the ASEAN summit are the South China Sea, human trafficking, and Myanmar. The estimated cost of damage caused by severe tropical storm Paeng to the country's agriculture and infrastructure sectors has so far reached close to 9 billion pesos, according to the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council today. In its situation report, the NDRRMC placed agriculture damage at 4.27 billion in Cagayan Valley, Central Luzon, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, Bicol, Western Visayas, Zamboanga Peninsula, Northern Mindanao, Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, and the Cordillera Administrative Region or CAR. Affected farmers and fisher folk are placed at 109,489. The death toll from Paeng's onslaught has also climbed to 154, 124 of which have been validated. Out of a total of 147 injured persons, 113 have been verified, while 19 out of 30 reported missing persons have also been confirmed. Small island nations led calls at the UN Climate Summit to tax oil companies' windfall profits and to pay for damages caused by natural disasters and to enact a non-proliferation treaty to halt fossil fuel production. Developing nations have pressed their case at the COP27 summit in Egypt for the creation of a loss and damage fund, arguing that rich nations are to blame for the biggest share of greenhouse gas emissions. Oil companies have scored tens of billions of dollars in profits this year as crude prices have soared in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Take a look.
Governments and corporations come to the COP each year, delivering grand statements with lofty commitments. But these commitments are only partially honored. It is about time that these companies are made to pay a global carbon tax on their profits as a source of funding for loss and damage.
Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley, meanwhile, called for a 10% tax on oil companies to fund loss and damage. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, however, told reporters here is not the place to develop fiscal rules. The contentious question of loss and damage was added to the COP27 agenda after intense negotiations. The U.S. and European Union have dragged their feet on the issue in the past, fearful of creating an open-ended reparations regime. Brown later told reporters that China and India, while not considered developed countries, should also fund loss and damage, as they are the world's top and third biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, respectively. According to the UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF, almost 28 million children have been impacted this year by record flooding in 27 countries. Take a look.
According to a UNICEF analysis released today, 27.7 million children in 27 countries have been impacted by flooding so far in this year. UNICEF also urges world leaders to agree immediate funding for the children who are facing and will be facing irreversible climate losses and damages. Governments must close the finance gap for addressing loss and damage at COP27. Decisions about climate change, included in these halls at COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, need to be inclusive, especially of young people from the most affected places.
The aftermath of floods is often more deadly for children than the extreme weather events that caused the flooding. In 2022, floods have contributed to the increased spread of major killers of children, such as malnutrition, malaria, cholera, and diarrhea. In addition to threatening the lives of millions of children, the floodwaters have disrupted essential services and displaced countless families. After a long, heated campaign, polls have opened, and Americans are now bracing for a tense night of election results and legal challenges ahead. Control and balance of Congress, the future of President Joe Biden's agenda, are standing in the balance. According to University of Florida professor Michael McDonald's U.S. election project, as of midday Tuesday, 45.8 million early votes had been cast. Of them, 25.4 million by mail or placed in drop boxes. Let's look at some reactions.
I think the climate's extremely polarizing across the board. It's kind of scary where we stand. I think that even in a midterm, even though it's kind of an off year, it's a reprimand of what we're dealing with. So
unfortunately, a third of the country doesn't care about the facts, the truth, the honesty. It's never going to get in the way of what they want to believe.
There are sides of the Republicans that I agree with and disagree with, and there's sides of the Democrats that I agree and disagree with. I really try to not think of myself as being part of one party, but being an American and trying to vote for the best candidate and the person who will surround themselves with the right people.
I was inspired to vote just because if I want to make change in my community, it's best to do the local elections. And I know that especially because if we're going to make change, we need to do that locally. And so it's really important to vote in your local election. And I do want to make change. And I think, it's really good to put my vote out there.
Actually, I'm watching a lot of the Senate races and the governor races. I would like to have a different governor in Nevada. I feel like Sisolak did a bad job. He had people stay home. He could have done things differently. He chose not to.
Republican. I'm 100% Republican because I love this country. It doesn't matter who's president will be to me. Trump, I love Trump, but I am voting the most to save this country.
No, I just think that the Republicans are getting a little outrageous the past few years, and whether I used to be one or am one now or whatever is irrelevant, they're losing their marbles. It's dividing the country, and it's scary.
Meanwhile, Joshua Korlenchik, Senior Fellow for Southeast Asia at Washington-based think tank Council on Foreign Relations and a contributing writer to Japan Times, said the results of the midterm elections could have significant implications for the Asia-Pacific region. If the Democrats retain control of Congress, it would likely mean a continued ramping up of an assertive policy on China, both actually in the region and through U.S. industrial policy. As a result, the administration would most likely continue to ignore much of Southeast Asia, including the catastrophic civil war in Myanmar and the State of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in general. A Democratic victory in both houses of Congress in the midterm elections would probably lead to a foreign policy focus, he said, almost exclusively on Northeast Asia. as well as a very significant effort by the administration to sell its signature Indo-Pacific Economic Framework proposal to partners in the region. The proposal doesn't appear to contain much of interest to the region and pales in comparison to a genuine trade agreement. But continued democratic control would almost surely mean pushing the agenda as much as possible. However, split control of the U.S. government, he said, in which the Democrats control the presidency and the Republicans control one or both houses, could spur changes in the administration's policy on Asia. As noted, he said it is unlikely that the Republicans will take the Senate, and even if they did, Republican senators in general, particularly GOP leader Mitch McConnell, tend to be aligned with the Biden administration on policies related to China and Taiwan, as well as an increased emphasis on Northeast Asia and Australia. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis appeared headed for a landslide victory over his Democratic rival, boosting his chances of successfully challenging Donald Trump for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Take a look.
Today, after 4 years, the people have delivered their verdict. Freedom is here to stay. We not only won election, we have rewritten the political map. We will never ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is
While DeSantis has not declared his candidacy for president, he is clearly keeping his options open. He refused to commit to serving out a full second term as governor. Now, former President Trump took aim at his potential presidential rival's prospects, telling Fox News the day before the vote that if DeSantis runs for White House, he said, quote, he could hurt himself very badly. On election night, former U.S. President Donald Trump praised the results of candidates he endorsed in the midterms. Take a look.
Pretty good number. And then tonight, because they kept saying, well, he's good on nominations, but is he good on the general election? So as of this moment, and we have some out there, we are 80 wins and 3 losses. Is that good? Wouldn't that be funny if we were better on the general election than the nominations themselves? So that's great. Now, in North Carolina, the numbers have been amazing so far. Now, this is just up until this point. But as of this moment on endorsements, with the nominations, we had a total of 330 endorsements on nominations. This is only on nominations. This isn't for tonight. And of the 330, we won 200. We won 324.
Now, all eyes will be on a handful of closely fought Senate races, including in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Ohio, with a single seat enough to swing control of the Senate, now evenly divided and controlled by Democrats only through the tie-breaking vote of Vice President Kamala Harris. The outcome may also determine whether President Biden, who turns 80 this month and is the oldest president ever, will seek a second term in 2024. Now, former U.S. President Donald Trump said earlier that he voted for Governor Ron DeSantis, and he urged Americans to get out and vote. Take a look.
If you thought that Donald Trump was yesterday's man, then you've simply not been paying attention.
How do you feel, sir? I think we're going to have a great night. I think it's going to be great for the country. It's an honor to be here. They've done a fantastic job inside. I think you got to go out and vote. You have to vote. No matter who you vote for, you have to vote. It's so important. And this is going to be a very important election.
The EU on Tuesday extended its sanctions on Myanmar's junta, targeting 19 more individuals and entities, including a minister and a chief justice. The measures against Myanmar were announced by the European Council because of the continuing escalation of violence and grave human rights violations following the military takeover 2 years ago. The latest sanctions target Myanmar's Minister of Investment and Foreign Economic Relations, Can Zhao, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Han Tun-u, and high-ranking military officials. Also listed were Election Commission officials and business people representing firms linked to the junta. In total, 84 individuals and 11 entities in Myanmar now fall under the EU sanctions, which include visa bans and the freezing of assets in the European Union. Previous sanctions maintained include an embargo on weapons and on equipment that can be used to spy on communications. It was the fifth package of EU sanctions on the Southeast Asian country under military rule since 2020, when the military staged a coup against a civilian government led by Aung San Suu Kyi, now in prison on corruption charges judged spurious by Europe. Myanmar has been in turmoil under the junta, which faces widespread armed resistance and has responded with a brutal crackdown. A jailed outspoken American Cambodian activist has begun a one-week hunger strike to protest conditions in prison ahead of U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to the kingdom. Lawyer and campaigner Thierry Sang, a longtime critic of Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen, was imprisoned for 6 years for treason in June in a mass trial that also saw around 60 opposition figures convicted. Her strike comes ahead of Biden's visit to capital Phnom Penh later this week to attend the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit. The U.S. leader is also expected to meet with Hun Sen. In a statement on Monday, the 51-year-old activist team calls upon the president to press Hun Sen for Thierry's freedom. Jared Genser, a U.S.-based lawyer representing her, said she had also been denied rights permitted to other prisoners, including having weekly access to church services and the ability to regularly make phone calls. Currently in a prison in western Praya Viar province, Thierry Sang began her hunger strike Monday in a bid to compel authorities to transfer her to Prayzar prison in Phnom Penh. Finally, in our news, the Department of Education warned the public against spreading fake news online following a school bomb scare last Monday. This came after a class suspension was announced at Signal Village National High School after an online threat was seen from a certain dummy or unverified account during the flag-raising ceremony live streamed via Facebook. Take a look.
Sa observation ko naman, talagang ginawa talaga ng principal agad namin yung nararapat na action. Then maya-maya, dumating naman agad yung mga SWAT at natuwa naman kami kahit papaano na.
The DepEd National Capital Region, or NCR, said it has been working closely with the Taguig local government and the city police to hold the account user liable. The Taguig LGU earlier posted on Facebook a call to the public as it assured control over the situation. Contrary to the alarming information circulated online, no explosives were found within the school vicinity. As of Tuesday, classes have resumed upon the advice of the DepEd NCR. On Monday, classes were immediately suspended in the Taguig school as the police's Special Weapons and Tactics, or SWAT team, and bomb squad surveyed the area. The Taguig City Police, meanwhile, ensured intensified monitoring of all schools in Taguig as it warned fake news spreaders. Bomb scare is considered a violation of the anti-cybercrime law and Presidential Decree 1727, or the malicious dissemination of false information or the willful making of any threat concerning bombs, explosives, or any similar means of destruction. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.